Welcome to this special episode for activists with the Abortion Freedom Project. In this kind of accountability canvassing, we engage voters in a conversation about their views on reproductive freedom and offer handouts with information about anti-choice extremists in our legislature. Accountability means holding someone responsible for their actions, especially when those actions have caused some harm. Holding a person to account often also implies some reparation or consequence. In the case of elected officials who have actively sought to undermine the health of New Hampshire residents, the most logical and achievable consequence is the loss of their power. We need them voted out in 2026. Your canvassing will contribute to that outcome. With that in view, let's look at our immediate goals with this conversation. First, as always, to listen. Help people feel heard on an individual level and respected for their opinions. As Planned Parenthood puts it in the Bridging the Gap training, our goal is to meet people where they're at, actively listen, and make our case. In order to have any opportunity to make a case, we also need to find points of commonality and alliance, building trust and mutual respect. We need to provide the voter with increased information and expanded awareness. And ultimately, we want to promote voting against the extremist and replacing that person in the next election. With our purpose defined, we're just about ready to approach doors, but first I'm going to share a statement from a friend of deep canvassing in Barnstead, New Hampshire. We were debating how assertive a canvasser should be when the door opens. To me, this friend said, it's not a matter of assertiveness, but a matter of someone's remarkable, memorable, human presence and purpose for being there. That evokes respect, that motivates and smooths frank conversation, and that leads to relevant and productive action. I love that. So let's gather our courage, curiosity, and compassion and go to doors. When the door opens, you'll introduce yourself, emphasizing your identity as a neighbor. Hi, my name is Martha. I live right here in town. You'll indicate your affiliation. I'm with a group of volunteers with the Kent Street Coalition. And you'll ask to speak with the voter on your list. I'm hoping to speak with John Smith. Remember that if you're using the Minivan app on your smartphone, this text will be available on your screen to check before you go to the door. Next, you state your purpose. We're out surveying our neighbors about what's happened in the New Hampshire legislature this year. We're focusing on reproductive freedom. Now, the person may look confused or ask for clarification. That is, what people think about abortion. May I ask what your views are on that? The person is likely to be pausing to think. Remember that these folks have not agreed in advance to discuss this topic, as they do in Planned Parenthood's canvassing. They're likely to be surprised. So you can make it easier. I'll give you a scale. Let's say 5 is you believe safe abortion care should be available to everyone as wanted or needed. And 1 is you believe no one should ever be permitted to have an abortion for any reason. Where do you think you'd place yourself? Oh, I'm so glad you're asking me. I was so upset when Roe fell, and I just hate the way all these male politicians think they can control our bodies. I'm a 5 for sure. When you get out your phone to record data after the conversation, you'll get a screen with that scale, and you'll click one. What if you meet a voter whose choice is number one, strong disagreement? Oh, I can't even hear that word you said. Our pastor has us praying every Sunday for those poor lost babies. Or at another door,
Listen, I don't vote. No offense. We can talk all you want, but I don't believe in getting tangled up with the government in any way.
in this case, you could leave this survey question blank and use the notes function in Minivan to type in why. Now, in bridging the gap conversations, you might well choose to listen more to these folks and engage in exploring their views. In our canvassing, with its focus on accountability for anti abortion extremists, you may choose to thank the voter with strong anti choice faith and the non voter and move on. Now, let's hear from John Smith, a voter in the middle.
Well, I wouldn't want my wife or my daughters to do this. I think all babies deserve to live. I guess sometimes if the mother's really young or if someone forced her, I'm not so sure.
Now that this man has chosen his position on the scale, he's unsure, you're ready for your second step, where you're listening empathetically, asking open ended questions. These are the generic questions you might use in any canvassing conversation. Can you tell me more? It sounds as if, is that right? Or what's affected your thinking on that? For the topic of reproductive freedom, as we saw in the Bridging the Gap approach, a more specific prompt can help draw out personal experiences or views. In the conversation with John, I might choose this one. Yes, it's such a complicated issue, and the decisions are so personal. Do you know anyone who's faced a difficult pregnancy?
Well, this woman in my office had an awful time. It was her third child, I think. And in the middle of it, her doctor said they didn't think the child would live. I can't remember what the disease was, but she was hospitalized and there was an operation of some kind. And after that, she didn't have the baby. So I guess that was an abortion, but it was so sad. She was pretty devastated. You could see after she came back to work, but she didn't want to talk about it.
You can judge when it's time to share your own story, seeking to make a connection. You can affirm the feeling you're hearing and tell something that matters to you. My sister had something like that. She really wanted a baby and she waited so long. But when she finally got pregnant, it turned out to be an ectopic pregnancy, where the embryo is in the fallopian tube. That can't go to term. It would have threatened her life. So abortion really was her only option then. She was able to have a child a few years later. Oh, it's my little nephew. I love him. But if my sister hadn't gotten that abortion care, I don't know what would have happened. Now, maybe the person you're talking with says something challenging. You're going to empathize, confirm that you've heard the feeling, so you're validating the person without adopting their perspective. You're going to model empathy toward people who get negative judgments from other people. And remember to listen for cognitive dissonance. Is there any opening to reframe the topic and widen the perspective? You can offer some information if it's relevant, but be careful not to correct if it's going to sound judgmental on your part. And don't get pulled into an argument.
Yeah, those situations where the mother's life is in danger, that's clear. I don't have a problem with that. But I wonder is if some people are just too lazy to use birth control. like it's easier to have an abortion than to be responsible, you know?
You heard some conflicting ideas there. John doesn't oppose abortion in medical emergencies, but he's still dismissing some choices with a negative judgment. You might have a chance to reframe the discussion. I've heard that too, and I agree it's confusing. Would anyone actually do that? I mean, I think sometimes people get called lazy when we don't really understand what's going on for them. I was a teacher and I remember this one kid who seemed so lazy. Everyone thought that. But it turned out he had a learning problem that no one had caught. So it's hard, especially if we don't know someone at all, to understand how they make their choices. Life can throw so much at us.
Right. I get that. I was just wondering about this thing I heard on TV. It's not like I know anybody who does that. I don't mean to be at all critical here. I mean, it's not for me to judge.
Right. I appreciate that. I'm concerned that our lawmakers are judging and deciding what other people should do. And I'm not sure they understand the effects their actions have on real lives. If the conversation goes on from here, you'll return to listening and asking questions so you can help the voter hear their own conflicting ideas more clearly and make progress on sorting them out. And you'll judge when it's time to bring the focus back to your purpose and a call to action. I'm hearing that we both agree on that matter of personal choice. Let's get back to what you might want for you, your family, the community. How could our elected representatives help with that? One of the things we're doing is making sure voters know the positions their representatives in Concord have been taking on this. Our representative is, and you might say your representative if you're canvassing outside your own district, and now you ask an open-ended question. What do you think of her? Many voters may be unfamiliar with the representative's positions. This is why we're out canvassing. I have this list of bills she sponsored and her votes on bills related to reproductive freedom. You're welcome to take this. For instance, she voted to cut funding for the New Hampshire Family Planning Program. Her party's goal is to eliminate this program completely. You'll be using the talking points your group has chosen for the summary until you judge it's time for your direct question. If this person runs again to represent you, will you vote against her? You'll record the response, hoping for support to vote them out. If the voter is unsure, you might ask whether you could return and talk again. And even if the voter wants to keep the anti-abortion extremist in office, you can continue to be compassionate and curious by asking a last question. Even though our group's focus is abortion, we'd love to know what other issues you're thinking about. What would you say is your top concern? This list is a standard survey question in Minivan. Social justice here includes racial justice, LGBTQ, and other civil rights. You choose one from this list, including other if there's something missing. As always, you have the option to select notes and write details about the voter or the conversation. And as this last part of the conversation comes to a close, you'll end with appreciation. Thank you so much. Closing with thanks is appropriate no matter how the conversation went. And thanks to you for watching. I hope to see you in the Zoom workshop where we'll practice this kind of conversation together.
be surprised. People in this world are getting organized. You're bound to lose, you fascists bound to lose.
All you fascists bound to lose.